So let's say you have a skirt, or you even have a coat, like a lab coat, where it actually, the end of it actually comes down past your waist, so that now when you actually need to set up the rig, you're having problems because you actually just bind it to the leg area, like the hips, the legs, and the root, like I'm going to do right now. You're usually not going to get the best results. While it is possible to just simply weight the entire thing together and get a decent result, usually not the simplest thing. Now, in conjunction with doing a bind using very specific joint selections and using Maya's new geodesic binding settings, it did okay. I mean, you can actually see that the deformation is somewhat rough. It's a little jagged. The weight distribution's not great. It's not as bad as it could have been, but we could do better. If we take a look at the weights really quick, you can see that it's very, very, very general, and there's going to be a lot of intersecting with the body that's going to occur here. So that's something we definitely want to try to avoid. Now, part of that's going to be adjusting the weights so that they're actually very solid around the waist area. Another part of it is actually assigning some secondary influences so that if there is any intersection that occurs, it's really easy to actually make adjustments to it and to even give the skirt more of a flowing appearance without going full end cloth. So, to start refining control of the skirt, what I like to do is I like to create a few extra joints. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to create a NURBS curve. I'm going to create a NURBS circle. Okay. And we'll see how big that is relative to the skirt, so it's close to the size I want. And let's say I want to create two different control points in the skirt. Maybe one towards the base, and then maybe another one towards the middle, and then the rest can just be anchored into the root and the spine. Okay, so let's say I'm going to have a control area here. And so then you want to scale your control curve down so that it's pretty much the contour of your skirt. Get as close to it as possible. Well, it doesn't have to be perfect, just more or less. So close. Should be good enough. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate that and create one more a little higher up. Scale it down. Those are going to be my two controls. I'm going to go to modify and freeze transformation. I'm actually going to do it right here from my channels box. Delete any history that's on those as well. And of course name them. I'll just call these, I'll use my quick rename. So I have control curve 1 and 2 now. So now I need to go to skeleton, joint tool, go to my option box just to check my options. I'm going to reset the tool, and then I'm just going to create a joint down here. Okay, so I have a single joint. I'm going to rename that joint, or waistcoat, or kilt. Depends on what you're, let's say, we'll call it a kilt. Why not? Okay. Okay, so once you create your joint, simply press Control or Command G for a Mac to make a group around it. Once you have your group, name your group. Always name your groups. So I'm going to call this one my joint underscore kilt underscore capital G group, GRP. Okay, so name it specifically. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually take that group and we're going to attach it to the curve. So we're attaching the joint by attaching the group. We're going to leave the joint independent by attaching the group instead. This way we can actually set up controls on the joint easily without encountering problems, because when you actually attach something to a curve, its attributes are connected to the curve. So we actually need something around it, so we're going to use the group as sort of a proxy to contain our joint. So select that group, shift select the curve, and in your animation menus, go to Animate, go to Motion Paths, and Attach to Path. Attach to path, and once it's attached, it'll basically snap right up to the curve at its 0 location. That could be in the front, it could be in the back. It depends on how you oriented the curve when you actually aligned it. Once it's actually in position, all you're going to do is you're going to expand, go to the channels box, go to the inputs, go to where it says motion path, and you're going to go to the U value. And the first one can actually stay at 0, but then you need to create a few more. So make sure that when you're actually doing this, that you're duplicating your group. So select your joint, group it, duplicate it, shift select the curve, go to animate, motion paths, attach. Once it's attached, go to the motion path, break the U value connection in the inputs. So right click, drag down to break connections. Okay, and then you can move on to the next one. Select the joint. If it's not in a group already, group it. Make sure you have the group selected, not the joint, the group. Shift select the curve. And then go to animate, motion paths, attach to motion path. Now as you're doing this, you should see your group. Make sure it's the group, not the joint. Go to the inputs, motion path again, right click on the U value, break connections, and then we're going to nudge this one around, let's say halfway, let's say 0.5. So 0.5 will put it on the equal opposite side of our curve. Okay? And so then it's going to be fractional from there. Basically 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. Depends on how many joints you're actually planning on putting on your curve. I usually do around 8 on a larger curve, and as they get smaller, I sort of decrease the number. But I try to put 1 in the front and 1 at the back towards when it's actually closer to the knees, because there's actually going to be more deformation in this area, and we definitely want more control in the middle. So you just keep doing that until you have all of the joints that you need going all the way around your curve. And possibly if you actually select your joints or select the groups around your joints and shift select the curve, you may be able to go to File, or sorry, Edit, Duplicate Special Option Box. And once you have one curve built, maybe you can duplicate it. Duplicate input graph. Let's duplicate it once. And I'll select the curve. Yeah. So you can actually do that. You can do a duplicate special. So you can just create one curve with the joints on it, select the groups and the curve, and then do a duplicate input graph, and it should duplicate the curve with the joints attached to it via motion path. That way you don't have to repeat the process with 2 curves. You just have to set up one curve, and then you can use duplicate special to copy it. So once you have your joints attached to your curves and positioned, all you have to do now is select both curves. So I've got both curves selected. I've just selected the femur joint, the left and the right femur, or basically the thigh joints that control the rotation of the leg, the upper leg. And I'm going to bind my curves to 1 and 2 joints, just those 2. So go to Skin, Smooth Bind, go to the option box, and set your bind option to selected joints only. So selected joints. And you can use the bind method. Closest and distant should be fine. And you could even play around skinning method, maybe do a weight blended or something, basically whichever one of those. Max influence is 2, and everything else is off. You should be fine. Bind skin. So now when we've bound it, if you rotate the leg, you'll see that the curves are actually moving away from the geometry of the leg. So once we actually take the skirt and have it influenced by the joints on our curves, we'll be in business. So shift select all of the joints. Okay. Shift select the skirt or the kilt or the waistcoat or whatever piece of dangling geometry you have. Go to Skin, or actually go to Skin. You want to go down to Add Influence. Since the skirt is already bound, we're going to do an Add Influence. And so once the Add Influence window is open, deselect a few things, or actually you'll see the settings that actually look like this. So we need to actually activate weight locking. So we're going to lock weights. What lock weights is going to do, it's going to lock whatever the default weights are, but we actually haven't painted anything yet. If you already painted weights on a lot of on your skirt. Let's say you have the waist and it's locked down the way you like it, but it's just the bottom part you need to work on. Same for a coat or anything else. Then you want to use lock weights because it'll actually protect those weights, but still add the joints so that they can have weights transferred to them. But since I'm not doing that, I'm just going to add them, and they'll basically just start absorbing control right away. So if I grab my leg joint and I rotate, you see that now the skirt is being influenced by the deformation of the curve. So now it's just a matter of going in and painting the weights to refine that deformation. So if I right click and I come down, let's say I'll select this joint as an influence. Okay, you can see that it already has a great deal of control in this area, so I could actually just give it more. I'm just adding influence, just painting. Okay, and I can smooth things out a little bit around it. Go to the next nearest joint and start doing the same things. Basically, just go to your joints, start giving them influence. If they're very close to a vertex, probably a good idea to give it full control of it, and just go through and paint your weights until you have something that you like. Now, one thing that you can do just to make your life a little easier when it comes to reassigning your weights, if you have already bound the skirt so that it's being influenced by the leg joints, what you can do is completely remove the leg joints or the femur joints as influences for the skirt, because we want this area of the skirt to be completely controlled by the joints that are running around our curves, and pretty much just the hip, the root, and the spine are going to control the rest. So we don't need the legs influencing the skirt at all. So shift select the femur joints, shift select the skirt, and then go up to skin and choose to remove influence. And basically it'll just take the legs out as an influence, and it'll reassign the weights to a certain amount to whatever's left. And then you can go in and paint your weights just so that the floating joints on these curves and the joints in the skeletal structure are the only ones that actually control the skirt. Now, as always, the trickiest part is going to be making sure that the joints that you've added are controlling everything more or less like what you want. When it comes to this setup, there's going to be a lot of sharing amongst the joints involved and the joints that are basically stabilizing the skirt in general. So the root and the hip will play a major role in preventing certain areas from collapsing inward when the leg raises. So if I right click and I choose, let's say, the hip, or let's say the root here in this case, as the influence, I can use it to counteract the collapse that was occurring because the leg was rising and the hip wasn't controlling enough, or the root wasn't. So I can just do that, and there's going to be a little bit of smoothing in here as well. So even though I have a lot of joints in very specific places, I'm actually sharing a lot of the influence. So maybe when you do that initial bind, you could even do set the influences to about 3 so that it actually softens the influence to a certain degree. So it gives it a little more of an organic deformation from the initial bind. And hopefully, if you get the settings just right, there may be a little less to adjust. But basically, you want to test while you're painting the weights so that you can make sure that the leg isn't intersecting with the skirt and it's just moving with the leg. Okay, so once you actually have one side of your skirt performing as smoothly as you think it needs to, you can basically put your character back into its default position, select the skirt or kilt or waistcoat or whatever you're rigging, go to skin, go to mirror skin weights, go to the option box, and I usually mirror from essentially my right or camera left to camera right, in this case, camera left to camera right. So positive X to negative, so that's the default here. And I'm going to do influence association of 1 to 1 and then closest joint. So hopefully it'll actually mirror the weights from the character's left to the character's right perfectly. Then I just mirror and I just test the right side to make sure everything is performing as expected or as close as possible, and it seems to be working out just fine there. And it looks like I missed something here on the other side. Okay, so I just need to fix that. But aside from that, everything is performing as expected.